They say you can measure a species by how they face extinction. Some flee to the far corners of space, others surrender with dignity, and a few simply vanish into the cosmic void without a whisper. But humans? Humans do something else entirely. Something that defies every law of survival, every instinct of self-preservation, every logical calculation of odds and outcomes. I am Commander Zethkri of the Galactic Defense Coalition, veteran of 47 campaigns across the Outer Rim. I've seen civilizations rise and fall, watched empires crumble under the weight of their own ambition, and witnessed the death screams of entire worlds. In my 3 centuries of life, I believed I had seen every possible response to warfare that organic life could produce. I was wrong. What I witnessed in the Kepler Nebula changed not just my understanding of humans, but my entire perception of what it means to be alive in this vast, unforgiving universe. When the Vorthak swarm descended upon the human colonies like a plague of metal and death, every species in the galaxy wrote off Sector 7 as lost. The mathematics were simple, brutal, and absolute. 12 billion humans trapped on 17 worlds, facing an enemy that had already consumed 43 civilizations without losing a single battle. But humans don't believe in mathematics when it comes to survival. They believe in something far more dangerous, far more unpredictable, and far more terrifying than any weapon ever forged. They believe in each other. This is the story of how I learned why the galaxy trembles not at the sound of humanity's screams, but at the thunder of their war cries echoing across the void. This is the story of why even the ancient races, who have ruled the stars for millennia, now speak the word human in hushed, reverent tones. This is the story of the day I realized that humanity doesn't just fight wars. They transform them into something else entirely, something that makes gods of mortals and legends of last stands. The Vorthak thought they were hunting prey. They had no idea they were about to meet predators who had spent their entire evolutionary history turning certain death into impossible victory. I witnessed humans charging into war, and now I understand why the galaxy quakes. The first time I saw the Vorthak swarm through the viewport of my command ship, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 2 centuries of military service. Genuine fear. Not the tactical concern of a difficult battle ahead, or the nervous anticipation of commanding troops into danger, but the primal, bone-deep terror of witnessing something that should not exist in any sane universe. The swarm stretched across the darkness of space, like a living constellation of malevolence. Millions upon millions of biomechanical vessels pulsed with an alien heartbeat, their hulls gleaming with the sickly phosphorescence that marked Vorthak technology. They moved with perfect coordination, each ship responding to some hive mind signal that turned the entire fleet into a single, unstoppable organism of destruction. Commander Zethkri, my communications officer's voice cracked through the bridge silence. We're receiving surrender requests from 14 human colonies in Sector 7. They're requesting immediate evacuation assistance. I studied the tactical display with growing dread. The human territories lay directly in the swarm's path. 17 populated worlds with a combined population of 12 billion souls. Behind the swarm stretched a trail of consumed civilizations, the crystal cities of Naxara, reduced to glittering dust, the floating gardens of the Veltara homeworld, now nothing but drifting debris, the mighty fortress worlds of the Krogonian Empire, their supposedly impregnable defenses cracked open like eggs. Every species the Vorthak had encountered followed the same pattern: initial resistance, desperate fighting, inevitable consumption. The swarm didn't just conquer worlds, they consumed them utterly, stripping away everything of value and leaving behind barren rocks drifting in the void. What's the coalition's evacuation capacity? I asked, though I already knew the answer would be inadequate. Maximum emergency evacuation protocols could save perhaps 300 million beings, my tactical officer reported. But that's assuming perfect conditions and no interference from the swarm. 300 million out of 12 billion. The mathematics was stark and unforgiving. Nearly 12 billion humans would die in the coming weeks, and there was nothing the Galactic Defense Coalition could do to prevent it. The Vorthak swarm had never been defeated, never been slowed, never been anything but completely victorious in their expansion across the galaxy. I activated the communications array to deliver the news to the human colonial government. President Sarah Chen's face appeared on the main screen, her expression calm despite the impossible situation bearing down on her worlds. She was a relatively young human, perhaps 60 standard years, with graying hair and eyes that held a strange mixture of sadness and determination. President Chen, I began, my translator converting my words into the human language of English. The coalition has analyzed the situation in your sector. We can evacuate approximately 300 million of your people before the swarm arrives. I recommend prioritizing children, scientists, and essential personnel. For Commander Zethkri, President Chen interrupted, her voice carrying an odd tone that I couldn't quite interpret. We appreciate the coalition's offer, but we must respectfully decline. I'm sorry, President Chen. Did you say decline?
That's correct.
We won't be evacuating. She leaned forward, and I saw something in her eyes that made my secondary heart skip a beat. It wasn't resignation or despair. It was something far more unsettling. We're going to fight. I stared at the screen in disbelief. President Chen, with all due respect to human courage, the Vorthak swarm numbers in the millions of ships. They've consumed 43 civilizations without suffering meaningful losses. Your combined colonial fleet consists of perhaps 3,000 vessels, most of them civilian transports converted for light defense. This isn't bravery, it's suicide. President Chen smiled, and there was something in that expression that sent a chill through my exoskeleton. Commander, how long have you been studying human history? I've reviewed the basic files. I replied, confused by the apparent change of subject. Rapid technological advancement, tribal conflicts, relatively recent space colonization, standard aggressive species development pattern. Commander, in all of human history, we've never faced a fight we couldn't find a way to win. We've survived ice ages that should have killed us, diseases that should have wiped us out, and wars that should have ended our civilization. We've taken on empires 10 times our size and sent them running. We've stared into the abyss so many times that the abyss learned to blink first. I felt my confidence in my own tactical assessment wavering. There was something about the way President Chen spoke, a certainty that defied logic. President Chen, I understand that humans have overcome challenges in the past, but the Vorthak swarm is about to learn something new, she finished. Commander, I want you to position your fleet at the edge of Sector 7. You're going to witness something that will change how you think about warfare forever. Before I could respond, the communication ended. President Chen's face disappeared from the screen, leaving me staring at the tactical display showing the inexorable advance of the Vorthak swarm toward human space. Sir, my communications officer spoke hesitantly. We're receiving additional messages from the human colonies. They're not evacuation requests anymore. What are they? Coordination protocols, military deployment schedules, and, the officer paused, confusion evident in their voice, victory celebrations. Victory celebrations? The battle hasn't even begun. According to these transmissions, sir, the humans are planning post-battle festivities. They're scheduling victory parades for next month. I slumped in my command chair, trying to process what I was hearing. Either the humans had completely lost their collective sanity, or they knew something that the rest of the galaxy didn't. Given their species' disturbing tendency to achieve impossible things through sheer bloody-minded determination, I wasn't sure which possibility was more frightening. Over the next 3 days, I watched in fascination as the human colonies transformed themselves. Civilian vessels were retrofitted with weapons that violated several galactic treaties. Factories that had been producing agricultural equipment began churning out ammunition at rates that shouldn't have been possible with their technology level. Children, as young as 12, were learning to operate mining explosives while their parents converted pleasure craft into missile platforms. Most disturbing of all was the music. Every human transmission now carried the same background audio, martial songs that spoke of last stands and impossible victories, of heroes who charged into certain death and emerged triumphant. The melodies were infectious, stirring something primal even in my alien psychology. I found my crew humming human battle hymns without realizing it. Commander, my tactical officer reported, we're detecting massive energy signatures from the human worlds. They appear to be building something. I examined the sensor readings with growing bewilderment. The energy patterns were unlike anything in Coalition databases. Not weapons, not shields, not any recognizable technology. The signatures pulsed in rhythm with the human population centers, as if the entire species was somehow synchronizing their biological rhythms across 17 worlds. Sir, incoming transmission from Admiral Harrison of the Human Colonial Fleet. The view screen activated to show a grizzled human male in military dress. Admiral Harrison looked exactly like what Central Casting would order for a warrior commander. Scarred face, steel-gray hair, eyes that had seen too much death and refused to back down from it anyway. Commander Zethkri. Harrison's voice was gravelly and direct. I understand you're planning to observe our engagement with the Vorthak swarm. That's correct, Admiral. The Coalition needs to document the final battle for the historical record. Harrison's laugh was sharp and bitter. Final battle? Commander, this isn't our final battle. This is where we teach the galaxy what happens when you threaten humanity's children. Admiral, I must urge you to reconsider. The Vorthak have never fought humans before. Harrison's eyes glowed with an intensity that made me instinctively step back from the view screen. Commander, do you know what makes humans different from every other species in this galaxy? Your aggressive tendencies are well documented, I replied carefully. Not aggression, hope. Harrison leaned forward, and I saw something in his expression that made my entire crew go silent. Every other species fights to survive. Humans fight to win. Every other species calculates odds and makes logical decisions. Humans make the odds irrelevant and turn impossible situations into inevitable victories. The transmission ended, leaving me staring at tactical displays that made no sense. The human fleet was deploying in formations that violated every principle of space warfare I'd ever learned. They were spreading their forces thin across multiple vectors, abandoning defensive positions to mass their ships in offensive configurations that left their colonies completely vulnerable. It was tactical suicide. It was also, somehow, terrifying. Sir, my sensor operator called out, the Vorthak swarm is entering the outer edge of Sector 7. Estimated time to first contact, 6 hours. I settled into my command chair and prepared to witness the extinction of humanity. What I didn't realize was that I was about to watch the birth of a legend that would echo through the galaxy for millennia to come. As the Vorthak swarm descended upon human space like a plate of metal death, every monitoring station in Coalition space was recording the engagement. This would be analyzed in military academies across the galaxy as a textbook example of how overwhelming force triumphed over desperate courage. Instead, it became the most studied military engagement in galactic history, replayed countless times by strategists trying to understand how 12 billion humans changed the fundamental nature of warfare itself. The last transmission from human space before the battle began was a simple message broadcast on all frequencies. Remember the Alamo. Remember Thermopylae. Remember that we are human, and humans don't surrender. 6 hours later, the shooting started. And the galaxy discovered what happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable human spirit. The first shots of the battle came not from the Vorthak swarm, but from humanity itself. As the alien fleet approached the outer planets of Sector 7, the humans did something that defied every tactical manual in existence. They attacked first. Not with their main fleet, which remained mysteriously positioned near the inner colonies, but with civilian vessels, cargo haulers, pleasure craft, mining ships, and passenger liners suddenly blazed with weapon signatures as they accelerated directly toward the approaching swarm. I watched in horror as thousands of obviously civilian ships charged into the teeth of an enemy that had never shown mercy to non-combatants. They're committing genocide against their own people, my tactical officer whispered, voice thick with shock. But as I studied the sensor readings more carefully, I realized something was wrong with that assessment. The civilian ships weren't fleeing in panic or being forced forward by their military. They were advancing in perfect formation, their crews singing loud enough that the Coalition monitoring stations were picking up the audio transmissions across multiple light years of space. The song was called The Battle Hymn of the Republic, and hearing 12,000 human voices raised in perfect harmony while charging into certain death made something cold and terrible settle in my chest. This wasn't desperation, this was something else entirely. The Vorthak response was swift and merciless. Energy beams that could slice through battleship armor like paper began cutting through the civilian fleet. Ships exploded in brilliant fireballs, their wreckage spinning away into the void. By any reasonable measure, the human charge should have broken within minutes. Instead, it intensified. For every civilian ship that died, 2 more accelerated, harder toward the enemy. As vessels exploded around them, the surviving crews sang louder. When the passenger liner, Hope of Terror, took a direct hit that should have vaporized it instantly, it somehow held together long enough to ram a Vorthak destroyer, taking the alien ship down with it. The crew's final transmission was a teenager's voice shouting, "Tell my mum I got one." "Commander, my communications officer," reported, voice shaking. "We're receiving thousands of individual transmissions from the human civilian fleet. Their last messages to their families." I listened to a few of the recordings, trying to understand what could drive an entire species to such coordinated madness. A mining engineer named Johannes told his children he loved them, and that Daddy's going to make sure the bad things can't hurt you. A grandmother named Maria sent a recipe for chocolate chip cookies to her granddaughter and added, "Make them for the victory celebration, sweetheart. Grandma's going to clear the way for it." These weren't the words of people facing death with grim resignation. They were the words of people who somehow, impossibly, believed they were going to win. The civilian charge continued for 3 hours. 3 hours of watching families sacrifice themselves to slow down an enemy that barely noticed their attacks. The Vorthak lost perhaps a dozen ships out of millions, but something else happened that the aliens couldn't quantify. With every human death, with every ship that rammed into their formation rather than fleeing, the swarm's perfect coordination began to fray at the edges. The Vorthak had evolved to fight enemies who responded to overwhelming force with fear, retreat, and eventual surrender. They had never encountered a species that responded to overwhelming force by becoming more dangerous, more determined, more utterly committed to victory regardless of cost. "Sir," my sensor operator called out, "the human main fleet is beginning to move." The human military formation that emerged from behind the inner planets was unlike anything I had ever seen. Their ships moved not in the rigid geometric patterns favored by every civilized species, but in flowing organic formations that seemed to shift and adapt in real time. Most unnerving of all, they were still singing. The entire human fleet, every ship from massive dreadnoughts to tiny fighters, was broadcasting the same song on all frequencies. It was called "We Shall Overcome," and hearing it sung by 3 million human voices while they advanced toward impossible odds made my primary heart skip beats. Admiral Harrison's face appeared on my view screen again. His expression transformed from the grim professionalism I'd seen earlier into something that was almost joyful. Behind him, I could see his bridge crew moving with the fluid efficiency of a team that had trained together for decades, even though coalition intelligence indicated most of them had been civilians just months ago. "Commander Zethkri," Harrison said, his voice carrying an odd note of exhilaration, "I thought you should know that you're about to witness something that's never happened before in galactic history." "What's that, Admiral?" "You're about to see what happens when the Vorthak swarm encounters a species that considers impossible odds to be a tactical advantage." Harrison smiled. And there was something in that expression that made me understand why predators across the galaxy had learned to fear the sight of human teeth. We've spent our entire evolutionary history turning hopeless situations into decisive victories. Today we're going to teach the galaxy that humanity doesn't just fight wars, we perfect them. The transmission ended just as the human fleet reached optimal firing range. What happened next would be analyzed by military strategists for centuries, because it changed the fundamental rules of space combat. The humans didn't fire their weapons. Instead, every human ship accelerated to ramming speed simultaneously. The entire fleet, 3 million vessels strong, charged directly into the heart of the Vorthak swarm, with no apparent intention of stopping to engage in conventional warfare. They simply aimed themselves at the enemy and accelerated until their engines screamed. The Vorthak response was immediate and massive. Energy weapons that could crack planets opened fire on the advancing human fleet. Millions of projectiles filled the space between the forces. The humans flew directly into this hellstorm without deviating course by so much as a degree. Ships died by the thousands. The vacuum of space filled with wreckage and expanding clouds of superheated gas. Any rational species would have broken off the attack within minutes. The humans sang louder, but they weren't just singing anymore. As I listened more carefully to the transmissions, I realized they were coordinating something. The songs had become a complex musical code that allowed the entire fleet to operate as a single organism. When one ship died, others smoothly adapted to fill the gap. When a squadron took heavy damage, nearby units immediately moved to support them. The Vorthak had spent millennia perfecting their hive mind coordination. The humans had accomplished the same thing in real time, using nothing but 3-part harmony and sheer bloody-minded determination.
"Sir," my tactical officer reported, voice filled with awe. "The human ships aren't just ramming randomly.
They're targeting specific points in the swarm formation. They're trying to create gaps in the enemy coordination network." I studied the tactical display with growing amazement. The human charge wasn't a mindless suicide rush. It was the most sophisticated military maneuver I had ever witnessed, disguised as desperate courage. Every human ship that died was dying in exactly the right place to disrupt the Vorthak formation. Every ramming attack was precisely calculated to cause maximum disruption to the enemy's command and control systems. The Vorthak swarm, which had operated as a perfect killing machine for millennia, was being systematically dismantled by opponents who turned their own destruction into a weapon. "Commander," my communications officer called out, "we're receiving a transmission from the human colony on New Terra. It's President Chen." President Chen's face appeared on my screen again, but now she was standing in what was obviously a military command center. Around her, I could see displays showing the battle in real time, and every human in the room was singing along with the fleet. "Commander Zethkri," President Chen said, her voice carrying the same impossible confidence I had heard before. "I hope you're taking detailed notes. Your species is witnessing the birth of a new type of warfare. President Chen, your casualties are enormous. Nearly 40% of your fleet is gone, and 90% of our objectives have been achieved." She smiled that disturbing human smile again. "Commander, the Vorthak Swarm's greatest weapon is their perfect coordination. They're like a single, massive organism. And we're teaching them what happens when vital organs start failing." I looked at the tactical display again, and suddenly I understood. The human attacks weren't random. They were surgical strikes designed to cripple the swarm's ability to function as a unified force. Every human death had accomplished something specific, and the cumulative effect was becoming visible. The Vorthak swarm was no longer moving as one entity. Gaps had appeared in their formation. Ships were responding to threats a few seconds too slowly. The perfect killing machine was developing flaws, and the humans were exploiting every one of them. "But the cost," I protested. "The casualties are acceptable," President Chen replied, her voice becoming steel. "Commander, every human who has died today knew exactly what they were accomplishing. We don't sacrifice our people needlessly. We transform their sacrifice into victory." As if to emphasize her point, a wing of human fighters broke through the Vorthak formation and began attacking from within the swarm. They flew with impossible precision, weaving between alien ships like leaves dancing in a hurricane. Their target was a massive biomechanical structure at the heart of the swarm formation, something my sensors identified as the primary coordination nexus. The fighters died to a ship reaching their target, but not before their leader, a pilot named Captain Maria Santos, managed to arm a weapon that shouldn't have existed and plant it directly against the nexus hull. The explosion that followed lit up half the system. When the glare faded, the Vorthak swarm was no longer a swarm. It was thousands of individual ships, suddenly cut off from the hive mind that had guided them for millennia. And that's when the humans stopped singing and started hunting. The transformation was instantaneous and terrifying. The scattered human ships, no longer charging in coordinated waves, became individual predators stalking confused prey. They had spent the first phase of the battle teaching the Vorthak what coordinated sacrifice could accomplish. Now they were about to teach them what human warfare looked like when the gloves came off. I settled deeper into my command chair, knowing that I was about to witness something that would haunt my dreams for the rest of my very long life. The humans had spent 3 hours turning themselves into a weapon. Now they were about to use that weapon to demonstrate why even the ancient races spoke their name in whispers. The silence that followed the destruction of the Vorthak coordination nexus was more terrifying than any battle cry. For a moment that stretched across the vastness of space, both fleets hung motionless in the void, the humans regrouping from their coordinated charge, the Vorthak struggling to comprehend a universe where their hive mind no longer guided every action. Then the humans began to hunt. What I witnessed in the hours that followed changed everything I thought I knew about warfare, about evolution, and about the fundamental nature of intelligent life. The humans didn't just press their advantage, they transformed the entire battle into something that resembled less a military engagement and more a demonstration of why Earth's apex predators had never gone extinct. The scattered Vorthak ships, suddenly operating as individuals rather than components of a vast organism, made the fatal mistake of trying to re-establish their formation. They began clustering together, seeking the comfort of the group coordination that had made them unstoppable for millennia. The humans let them gather into tight defensive groups, then struck with a precision that defied every tactical doctrine in the galactic database. "Sir," my weapons officer whispered, "the humans are using the enemy's own formation against them. They're turning the Vorthak defensive clusters into target-rich environments." Individual human ships, many of them damaged from the initial charge, began stalking the Vorthak clusters like wolves circling wounded prey. But these weren't random attacks. Every human vessel moved with purpose, as if following a plan that had been rehearsed countless times. They struck at precisely the moment when Vordak returned fire would endanger other alien ships, forcing the enemy to choose between effective defense and avoiding friendly fire casualties. The Vorthak, bred for collective action, had never learned to make individual tactical decisions under pressure. The humans had apparently been born knowing how to do exactly that. "Commander Zethkri," came Admiral Harrison's voice over the communications channel. "I thought you might appreciate a tactical analysis of what you're observing." Harrison's face appeared on my view screen again, but now his bridge showed signs of battle damage. Smoke drifted through the air behind him, and I could see crew members working frantically to repair damaged systems. Despite the obvious stress of combat, Harrison looked energized rather than exhausted. Admiral, your coordinated assault was unprecedented, but surely you've taken too much damage to continue effective operations. Harrison's laugh sent chills through my exoskeleton. Commander, that wasn't our assault. That was our reconnaissance in force. We were gathering intelligence on how the Vorthak respond to coordinated pressure. Now that we know how they fight, we can begin the actual battle. I stared at the tactical display in disbelief. The humans had just conducted the most devastating attack in recorded galactic history, and they considered it reconnaissance. Admiral, what exactly constitutes an actual battle in human terms? Watch and learn, Harrison replied, his expression shifting into something that made every survival instinct I possessed scream warnings. Commander, you're about to see why humanity doesn't just win wars. We redefine them. The view screen went dark, but within moments I understood what Harrison meant. The scattered human ships began implementing tactics that violated every principle of civilized warfare. They used their own damaged vessels as decoys, allowing Vortak forces to score killing hits on ships that were already evacuated, then used the resulting explosions to mask attack runs by undamaged vessels. Human crews deliberately vented atmosphere and power to simulate critical damage, drawing Vorthak ships into close-range engagements where human boarding parties could overwhelm alien vessels with the kind of hand-to-hand combat that no spacefaring civilization had practiced in millennia. Most disturbing of all, the humans began talking to their enemies. Not threats or demands for surrender, but casual conversation. Human pilots would open communications with Vorthak ships and begin discussing Earth weather, their families, their hobbies, all while maneuvering for killing shots. This is Captain Rodriguez of the UCS Determination, I heard over an intercepted transmission. Beautiful day for a space battle, don't you think? I was just telling my daughter about the time I went fishing on Lake Superior. Do you folks fish where you come from? Because I've got to tell you, there's nothing quite like the patience you learn from waiting for the perfect moment to set the hook. The transmission ended with the sound of weapons fire and the brief flare of a destroyed Vorthak ship on my senses. Sir, my communications officer reported, voice shaking, we're detecting similar conversations across the entire battle zone. The humans are... They're treating this like a casual activity.
I listened to more intercepted transmissions, trying to understand the psychology behind this approach.
Human crews were discussing recipes, sports scores, and vacation plans while simultaneously conducting military maneuvers that would have challenged elite special forces units. It was as if they had compartmentalized their consciousness, allowing them to remain emotionally calm and strategically creative while engaged in lethal combat. The effect on the Vorthak was visible on every sensor reading. Ships that had operated with mechanical precision began making erratic movements, as if their pilots were distracted or confused. The casual human chatter was somehow more unsettling to the aliens than traditional battle communications would have been. Commander, my tactical officer called out. The humans are implementing some kind of distributed command structure. Individual ships are making independent tactical decisions while still coordinating with the overall fleet. I studied the sensor data with growing amazement. The human fleet had transformed into thousands of individual units, each operating autonomously, but somehow maintaining perfect coordination with the larger battle plan. It was like watching a school of fish move as one organism, except each fish was simultaneously a predator capable of independent strategic thinking. The Vorthak, meanwhile, were falling apart. Without their hive-mind coordination, they couldn't adapt to the humans' fluid tactics. Every time they tried to establish a defensive formation, human units would appear from unexpected vectors and tear it apart. Every time they attempted to concentrate their forces for a counterattack, they would discover that the humans had anticipated the movement and prepared killing zones. Sir, my sensor operator reported, we're detecting massive energy signatures from the human colony worlds. They appear to be celebrating. I checked the readings myself, unable to believe what I was seeing. The human colonies were, indeed, celebrating. Massive festivals were breaking out on every world, with millions of people gathering to watch the battle on public displays and cheer for their fleet. It was as if they had never doubted the outcome. President Chen is requesting communication, my communications officer announced. President Chen's face appeared on my view screen, but now she was standing outdoors on what appeared to be a viewing platform overlooking a massive crowd of celebrating humans. Behind her, I could see families picnicking while watching the battle, children playing games between the food vendors, elderly humans teaching younger ones traditional Earth songs. Commander Zethkri, President Chen said, her voice carrying clearly over the sound of celebration. I hope you're getting good recordings of this engagement. Future generations of galactic strategists are going to study this battle for centuries. President Chen, how can your people be celebrating? The battle is still raging, and your casualties are heroes who chose their fate, she interrupted. Commander, every human who died today made that choice willingly, knowing exactly what they were achieving. We don't mourn our war dead during the battle. We honor them by ensuring their sacrifice leads to victory. I watched in fascination as the humans around President Chen continued their festivities, seemingly oblivious to the life and death struggle taking place in the space above their heads. Children were flying kites decorated with images of human spaceships. Teenagers were playing music that somehow harmonized with the battle hymns still being broadcast by the fleet. This is madness, I whispered. No, President Chen replied, having somehow heard my comment. This is humanity. Commander, do you want to know why the galaxy should fear us? It's not because we're particularly aggressive, or unusually warlike, or exceptionally violent. It's because we're the only species that turns warfare into a celebration of life. On my tactical display, the last coordinated Vorthak resistance was crumbling. Human ships were hunting down individual alien vessels, with the methodical efficiency of farmers harvesting crops. The battle that every expert in the galaxy had predicted would last weeks and end in human extinction was going to be over in less than 12 hours, with the Vorthak swarm completely annihilated. How? I asked, more to myself than to President Chen, but she answered anyway. Because we learned something during our evolution that no other species in the galaxy understands, she said. We learned that the deadliest weapon in the universe isn't technology or numbers or raw firepower. It's the absolute conviction that you're going to win, backed up by the willingness to sacrifice everything to make that conviction reality. The final Vorthak ship died with a brief flare of light against the stars. The mighty swarm that had consumed 43 civilizations had been completely destroyed by a species that the galactic community had considered promising but unremarkable. In the aftermath, as human crews began recovering their dead and salvaging what they could from the wreckage, I realized that I was witnessing the end of one era of galactic history and the beginning of another. The Vorthak swarm had been the galaxy's bogeyman, the unstoppable force that proved civilizations could rise only so far before being consumed by something larger and more ruthless. The humans had just proved that even bogeymen could be hunted to extinction by something more dangerous than they were. Commander, Admiral Harrison's voice crackled over the communications channel one last time. I trust this engagement has been educational. Admiral, I replied, struggling to find words adequate to what I had witnessed. I don't think the galaxy is prepared for the implications of what you've accomplished here today. Harrison's final laugh was warm and genuinely amused. Commander, the galaxy is going to have to prepare quickly. Because now that we've established that humans can win wars against impossible odds, we're going to start looking for new impossible odds to overcome. The transmission ended, leaving me staring at a starfield that looked exactly as it had 12 hours earlier, but somehow felt completely different. The universe was still the same vast, dangerous place it had always been. The difference was that now it contained a species that considered vast and dangerous to be advantages rather than obstacles. I filed my report to Coalition Command 3 days later. It was 1,700 pages long and included detailed tactical analyses, psychological profiles, and strategic recommendations. The conclusion was simple. Humanity had just announced their arrival as a galactic power in the most dramatic way possible, and every other species needed to decide very quickly whether they wanted to be humanity's friends or their targets. 6 months later, the Galactic Defense Coalition formally invited humanity to join as a founding member of a new strategic alliance. The invitation was delivered by a fleet of our best ships, all broadcasting human music and flying in formations copied from the Battle of Sector 7. We learned quickly. We had to. Because the alternative was eventually facing humanity in battle ourselves, and after what I witnessed in the Kepler Nebula, no sane species wanted to discover what humans considered appropriate tactics when fighting enemies who should have known better. The galaxy quakes not because humanity is cruel or violent or unusually aggressive. The galaxy quakes because humanity has mastered the art of making impossible victory inevitable, and they're always looking for new definitions of impossible. I witnessed humans charging into war. What I learned is that when humanity charges into battle, they're not just fighting their current enemy. They're declaring war on the very concept of defeat itself. And in 12 billion years of galactic history, the concept of defeat has never faced an enemy quite like humanity.